presentation. You just need to make sure this is.
Yeah. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5th meeting of the North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Expansion Project Advisory Committee. It's been quite a while since we've met, so we're going to do a presentation tonight to bring you up to speed, and then talk a little bit about some analysis we've been doing for the past 6-7 months, something like that. I do not have the PAC roster in front of me, but we have some folks here today. Oh, thanks. I just want to check and make sure to see who is here. So I'm going to go through this real quick. I'll say my name is Steve Faust with 3J Consulting, assisting the city with this process. With me is Nick Gross from Kittleson and Associates, our transportation engineer. And yeah, let's just go through this list to do a little roll call for our committee. I know Charlie Hopewell couldn't make it, but he had someone here on his behalf.
That's me.
Oh, why don't you come up to the table?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, grab a chair.
All right.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good afternoon. Chad Summer, CEO and president of UGB.
Thanks for being here, Chad.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Eric Lawson.
Good evening. This is Chris. I'm here for Eric.
Looks like Chris Barron is here for.
Yeah, so Eric is on business travel and couldn't make the meeting. So Chris Barron, the vice chair of the city's economic development committee, is here in this stead.
Planning Commission Chair King. Here. Mayor Lenahan.
Present.
Mike Holm.
I believe Mike sent you an email earlier today. so
Oh, that's
you
right.
emailed it.
Thank you. He can't make it today. He's traveling. Commissioner Noel.
Here.
Commissioner Nunnenkamp.
Here.
Glenn Bolin with ODOT.
Here remotely, thanks.
Glenn. Ann Devitt from DLCD has retired, but I think we have Kevin Young from DLCD here with us.
Good evening.
Hi, Kevin, thanks for being with us.
You bet.
Jessica Pelz.
I'm here, thanks.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks. I think that does it for our group. Yeah, so welcome, everyone. Andy, if you could pull up the presentation, please.
I'm Andy Barr, the city manager, for all those that don't know. Bill Reed is our finance director, so you next chime in from time to time with a lot of valuable things to say.
We're out of practice in these in-person public meetings, so bear with us. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
Steve, I gotta say, on my end, when I did this, it goes to presentation view. So if people have questions and things, I can't see them on Zoom at this point, so they just have to raise their hand or chime in. So yeah.
I think if you want to escape out of that, I can help you with that real quick.
That one, guys?
Nope, not that one.
This?
Yeah, reading. You still can't see that.
Well,
Nope. Here we go.
oh, good.
Great. So again, welcome everyone. Because it's been a while, we're going to do a quick project review. It's something a lot of our PAC members have seen a number of times, but we have a lot of new faces here, so we want to bring everyone up to speed. Then Bill is going to talk to us about the update to the city's economic opportunities analysis, a big part of our meeting tonight. We'll then move into our preliminary boundary location. One of the key reasons for us meeting tonight is to get feedback on the boundary location analysis. I should have switched those last two. We'll do next steps and then move to public comment as our last piece. But after the public boundary location analysis, we'll have time for PAC discussion, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end of the meeting as long as we need for public comments. So we'll definitely have time on the agenda for that. Next slide, please. All right, so phase one was conducted from September 2020 to June 2021. We worked on refining the land need for the city of North Plains. We worked on refining the land supply, and a lot of that work now is done or almost done. And one thing we did do was establish the study area for the urban growth boundary expansion. We're not, as I mentioned, we've conducted this preliminary boundary location analysis. And eventually, with a recommendation of this group, and then the city will move towards adopting an urban growth boundary amendment, which needs to also be approved by Washington County and the state of Oregon. Next slide. Okay, so project review. What you have seen before is the residential land need. The base need for housing is 110 acres. That was established through the housing needs analysis, which was conducted in 2017 and updated in 2021. We added an additional 15% for right-of-way for streets and infrastructure. And then we also have identified a need for 40 acres of parks. We talked to the school district and understand that there is not need for an additional school in our study area at this time, so we did not add any acreage for schools. What's very different from the last time we talked to you is the need for employment, land to accommodate employment needs over the next 20 years. That base need is now at about 688 acres. Bill's going to be talking a lot about this in just a few moments. And then if you look at 15% right of way for that, you have another 103 acres. So with 791 acres for employment and 167 acres for housing, you're looking at almost 960 acres total that the city is at least looking through this boundary location analysis at bringing into the city. Next slide, please. Bringing into the urban growth boundary, I should say. So we started in terms of phase one. We started with looking at a preliminary study area. We looked at, for those of you who aren't familiar, North Plains is surrounded by mostly rural reserves, but there are some portions of land that are undesignated. They're not designated as urban or rural reserves. And that really makes up our study area. I believe it's about 1,600 some acres. And because at this point in time, the city's not allowed to look into those rural reserves. So our focus was on the undesignated areas. There are certain permitted exclusions that we considered. If you have a specific need for industrial land, if the land is impracticable to serve with utilities, natural hazards, if there's scenic, cultural, or natural resources, or non-urban federal lands, those all can be excluded from the study area, but we excluded very little land from the study area. Next slide. So here is you can see all of the green areas. Those are the undesignated lands, which make up our preliminary study area. All of the kind of white or grayish land are the rural reserves. The red line that you see, we drew a 1 mile from the current city boundary line initially to look at our study area. And you can see pretty much all of that undesignated land in the green falls within that study area. Next slide, please. The state of Oregon has a priority for lands to be brought into the urban growth boundary. The first is urban reserves, which, as I mentioned, there are no urban reserves adjacent to the city of North Plains. There are rural exception lands, which North Plains does have, and I'll show that on a map on the next slide, and non-resource lands. Those are the first priority. The second priority is marginal lands, which don't apply here for North Plains. And then the third and fourth priority are first low-value farm and forest land, and second high-value farm and forest land. So those are the 4 priorities in which we look at to do our analysis. Next slide, please. So most of the land, all the land north of Highway 26 is, we did an analysis and it's all high-value farmland. There isn't any low-value farmland. So we really treat all of that land pretty much the same. The area south of Highway 26 does include exception lands, and it's the parcels that are either zoned rural commercial, rural industrial, and rural residential 5. You can see those red and orange designations. And so according to those priorities, we need to look at this land first, and then we would look at the rest of the land equally as first the first priority, then the fourth priority. However, one thing that we are trying to do and have put into our phase 1 materials was trying to remove, I'm sorry, you can see the blue dotted line outlines the exception area that I'm talking about right now. But one of the things that we're trying to do is make a case that the area around the airport, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, that basically the area that's in those hashed lines be excluded from our study area because of the challenges with developing those lands, being surrounded by the airport. There's already kind of scattered residential development. It's going to be hard to meet any significant portion of the city's residential or employment needs on those lands. So that'll be part of our proposal when we go to the county and the state. But in case there are some problems with that approach, we are including that area in our analysis going forward, so we can take a closer look at it if it is not excluded. Next slide. All right, so that's kind of where we left off, and now Bill is going to talk about that update to the economic opportunities analysis and the new information that's been produced. And when he's done, we'll go back to talk a little bit more about phase 2 of our analysis.
Good evening, everyone. Bill Reed, Finance Director for the City of North Plains. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So as part of considering urban growth boundary expansion and study units, the topic in conversation came up with City Council about the idea of being a bedroom community, jobs, housing balance, and understanding what that meant to the city in terms of thinking about growing and how much and how it should grow. And so City Council last September adopted 4 economic priorities by resolution, and we'll show them in just a moment. But the idea being that council recognized that becoming a bedroom community is a short, medium, and long-term fiscal problem. It creates a problem for residents having to drive long ways to get most of their shopping done. Community health, livability, jobs, housing balance declining over time is not something council wanted to see. So for the resolution on the next page, we'll get into that again in a second, really was meant to and directed the UGB expansion study process, and very specifically the EOA results, the EOA and the results that I'm about to go through. So in kind of at the beginning of this year, the new EOA was finished, kind of guided by that. Take a look to see what a realistic opportunity is, but to achieve it in a way that helps the city long-term, medium and long-term, reverse being a bedroom community and the problems, avoid the problems that will bring, and enhance livability in the city. So we go ahead to the next one. Thank you, Amy. These are the 4 priorities. I won't read them in detail, but the first one has to do with reverse the trend of being a bedroom community over the long term at the very least, and enhance job housing balance by giving some employment opportunity locally. The second priority, grow business investment locally so that there is a rebalancing of the tax base. And we'll talk about that in a moment. To have more employment and more business investment here that would contribute to revenues to the city and not make residents largely pay for the city's services and costs. The third one is finance infrastructure and services over the course of 20 years in a way that's sustainable, so that the city can offer better quality of life and different services that it doesn't currently or isn't able to right now. And the fourth one was bring those services and different businesses to town that allow fewer and fewer trips to other places at distance and time. That was kind of a big one as a result of COVID specifically. Staying at home, being even more isolated away from job shopping that normally happens, well, before COVID normally happened, and we're just getting back to it again. But that was kind of a big outcome. The thinking on that kind of came out of that even more, the restrictions during COVID. So great. So as far as how North Plains stacks up as a bedroom community, according to the most recent census data, 98% of our employed workforce, of our residents employed here, work outside the city. Just 20 people who live here also work here. All 1,120 other people who are employed and live in the city of North Plains work elsewhere, largely Hillsborough, Beaverton, some in unincorporated Washington County. Unsurprisingly, those are all big employment areas nearby, but outside of the city of North Plains. Of the jobs that are here, overwhelmingly filled by people commuting in. So it's a problem, there's a gigantic mismatch between people being able to live here and being able to also work closer to home, is the bottom line. The major upshot that we want to communicate, and we have communicated with others about this, is North Plains has been growing as a provider of workforce housing for other cities, is really what's going on. Other cities have employers and employment and job opportunity growing, but North Plains is growing and residents are moving here, find the community a great place to be, but they're going elsewhere. And so we're kind of providing everybody else's workforce housing for their jobs, their job growth and employment base. And we want to look at reversing that imbalance. This is just a demonstration, kind of a display of the jobs housing balance basically over the last few years as population has grown. We've added certainly more population than jobs, and there is a dip in employment due to COVID there in 2020. We don't have new numbers as of 2022. There's been a bit of a recovery, but the bottom line is that our jobs housing balance has been declining, certainly, and getting worse because of that factor I said. People are moving here, enjoy the community, but really they work elsewhere. And so that's a livability problem for the city, basically, that we want to work on reversing. According to PSU, by Portland State University, who does the official forecasting for urban growth boundary population throughout the state, and driving the results for the housing needs analysis that you've already seen before and we went through quickly, the city has to plan for a population by 2042, but by 2040, according to that same forecast, we're looking to have a little over 6,700 population. And right now, 2020, according to the census, we were at 3,441. We're about 3,500 right now. So what that means is we're projected to continue to provide a lot of housing for growth in North Plains, relatively speaking, but we can choose to either plan for employment to be here for those households, or we can plan to be an even worse bedroom community over the short, medium, and long term. And that's the choice the city has. And so the EOA went out to find out what opportunity was to help reverse that trend within the city. So anyway, just a summary. Because of the population growth, but because of our fiscal situation and growing bedroom community status, our service levels are declining within the city of North Plains annually. We have significantly more population for the city, but the tax base and how things work in state of Oregon for city finances, our service levels are getting lower and lower because of the situation. I also went out and researched how are our neighbors, and we'll get into this a little bit, what level of services are our neighbors providing. And compared to our neighbors in Western Washington County, North Plains offers a very lean level of services. It's a smaller community, and it doesn't have to be the same as other cities around us, but it's good to just kind of gauge where are we and what type of service levels might we offer relative to what other cities do. But we offer very lean services relative to what our neighbors do and where people who move here might be thinking about otherwise moving, and what they're moving to in the region. So in a moment, I'll get into the exhibit, but our tax base, therefore, property tax base has become increasingly highly dependent and increasingly dependent upon residential development and taxable residential assessment in the city. But the problem with that is that with residents come services, use of the library, demand for parks, streets. I mean, all the different things that the city has to pay for in providing services versus an employment base where employers don't put the same demand on services that residents do. So there's a balance that we need to get to that we don't have, and that imbalance is what's growing, is the bottom line. So here are two services in particular that many residents have a lot of interface with the city, and that is public safety, law enforcement, as well as parks and recreation. And it's just a comparison. There's a number of different ways to measure. There are a number of different ways to measure what service level provision is by a community. This is just one of them. Different departments provide different things. But this is just kind of a basic way to compare things. For public safety right now, in the city of North Plains, we're able to afford just over $160 per resident in annual law enforcement public safety spending. That's what we can afford. Our neighbors, Hillsborough, Cornelius, Forest Grove, and Banks, combined on average, are able to afford almost $460 a month in public safety and services. It's a big gap. Now, council's working on closing that gap. That was actually the topic of a work session on Monday. So that all of these are active issues that council's addressing. But a big part of it is just the city's wherewithal to pay for those services. Parks and Recreation, North Plains is able to afford just under $24 per resident right now in Parks and Recreation services because of the tax situation, the fiscal situation, basically. Our neighbors, on average combined, are able to afford about $246 per person in parks and recreation programs and services. So again, North Plains doesn't have to be these other neighbors or just like them, but it's good to gauge what those services are that are out there and think about how to get to something that the community might want more for livability purposes. And there's definitely a wherewithal for paying for it problem that we want to work on, and how the city grows is a big part of that. I'm good. Hydrate. Okay, so this is just a chart to kind of illustrate where North Plains is currently and where North Plains will be after the Brinhill development on the north side of town is fully built out. Right now, the city's tax base is 77% residential development, taxable residential assessment. So therefore, 23% of our tax base is employment investment and taxable employment for property taxes. When Brinhill's built out, we basically have roughly 20 acres left of land within the city that hasn't seen development on it yet, but I do know that the property owner is working on something that will come into the city before long with a development plan on it for industrial development. When that's gone, we're basically out of employment land on the industrial side. And I think we have 5 acres left on the commercial side. But the bottom line is that when Brinhill is built out completely, the city's tax base will be 83% residential, taxable residential assessment, and only 17% of the tax base will be employers and employment investment that's taxable for property taxes. We'll be the worst. I haven't looked at every city in Washington County, but we'll certainly be among the lowest tax base among cities that for employment investment that's being taxed for property tax purposes in about 5 years' time when Brinhill likely builds out completely. So fiscally, council recognizes we need to reverse that. because that's no way to pay for existing services that are declining already. And so the goal is to reverse that. So a big part of this has to be reversing the balance and bringing a higher percentage of taxable assessment coming from employment occurring here. And again, getting even more into the numbers, you know, I kind of did basically an audit of city council finances or city council of city finances over the last few years regarding how we're bringing in revenue to pay for services versus the services we're providing to residents. And it's an important issue. I mean, we're growing and residents increasing their use in the library and are looking for different parks and rec programs. And we want to get there for residents. But right now, per household, per housing unit in the city of North Plains right now on average, all the different revenues that the city gets from each residence being in the city, whether it's property tax they pay on average, whether it's the fees they pay for water usage through the city, whether it's money we get from the state on a per capita basis for different things, and the county for that matter, whatever we get, attributable to population and households. In 2021, the city of North Plains received $1,785 per household in revenue, attributable at all to households. The cost to serve those households, that average household in North Plains, cost the city $1,859. So at the low level of services that we're able to provide at this point, every single household in North Plains is actually a cost, it's a deficit. The city, at the level of services we are providing, we're running in the red per household, basically. Is the city losing money if you look at the budget and the financials? No, because we have a water fund that pays money into the general fund to help support this. But that is a fiscal problem too. It's a stopgap, and that's something else that council recognizes we're going to move differently with in the future. But that's how this difference has been paid. One final thing, city council is considering and looking at bringing police coverage to North Plains 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If that's when that happens, that cost will bump up the average per household cost annually to $2,245 a year. But we don't have any new revenue to pay for that. So the deficit would be the difference between that and revenue at 1785. So we're looking at ways to short-term figure out how to fund this, but medium and long-term, how the city grows is very important in helping make up some of these deficits, basically, that are current and are expected to continue. So that's kind of the bottom line. We can add as many households as we want, and they come and they pay property tax revenue, and that grows our revenue. But every one of those households demands services, and it's a net loss for everyone, and that's a problem. It just is. So we have to grow the employment base, and we have to do that in a way that counters the significant growth in residential development we've had and what we have to plan for now as well. I'm sorry. Oh, measure 50. I mean, I can get the details of measure 50, but just one of the notes, it's a good point to make. Under Oregon property tax law, which is measure 50 in the state of Oregon, your property tax bill can only go up by 3% annually. I mean, unless you add a deck or a bedroom or something where you are adding to the structure. But if you leave your home alone, don't do anything to it, annually your property tax bill can't go up by more than 3% under Oregon state property tax law. The cost to provide services to people goes up by 4 to 5% annually, even in low inflation years. We're looking at budgeting for costs going up 8 to 10% in some cases this year because of inflation. It's going to be very high. In a low inflation year, our cost to provide services to city residents goes up by 4 to 5% typically. And when you compare that to the fact that their tax bill can only go up by 3% annually, this is common to all cities in Oregon. It's measure 50 throughout the state. That difference between costs going up and property tax being held at a rate of growth, constant rate of growth, every city deals with this. And can they kind of do what we're doing, looking at how to grow to help pay for that difference. It's okay. It's good. Okay, so the new EOA, the new Economic Opportunities Analysis. The Economic Opportunities Analysis, Economic Development, which is goal 9 for planning in the state of Oregon, identifies the city's vision and needs for its economy and the resulting employment land that is required or sought in order to accommodate that vision and goal for growth. This time around, it was a bit more of a complicated and longer EOA because we wanted to make sure we interviewed and visited with as many agencies and individuals who are actively involved in Western Washington County's economy and its growth issues. So interviews and data about growth and economic opportunity were shared with us by Business Oregon, the state of Oregon's economic development agency, department, basically. Greater Portland Inc., the Portland Metro Region's economic development agency. Washington County, City of Hillsborough, and a number of other cities in Washington County shared information and talked to us about this issue. And then we also had access to and interviewed some industry brokers from different parts of the country, business industry brokers, recruiters who site search for different businesses and have a focus in Western Washington County, particularly Hillsborough. And then regional industrial brokers who deal with all kinds of businesses, mostly existing ones who are looking to stay or expand. And don't necessarily focus so much on recruitment. We're just talking businesses who are looking to grow and stay here. So that's who we reached out to and interviewed with extensively and got data and information from. And that's what drives this new EOA and its results. Our new EOA finds that the city has opportunity to add a little over 172 acres of land for commercial development, overwhelmingly office and business park type space. At a little over 91.5 acres, according to these estimates. On the industrial land side, over a 20-year period, the EOA found that we have an opportunity to add and see growth of a little over 515 acres of industrial land over a 20-year period. The vast majority of that is general industrial development and land, and that is everything from manufacturers to warehousing to wholesale goods to a number of different things, kind of a wide mix in that category. And then some flex business park that's kind of a higher mix of office. We'll show pictures of what this looks like in a moment because we have a very specific model that we looked at for market and opportunity reasons. But overall, land identified for opportunity for economic development over the next 20 years came to almost 688 acres of industrial and commercial land. The big difference here really, compared to even just a few years ago when the city looked at this before, a couple of big things. Number one, Hillsborough area, in just a matter of 2 or 3 years, has gone through a bunch of acres of land with new employers that just in the last 2 or 3 years have committed and built in the North Hillsborough area. 3 years ago, they were trying to figure out how to develop all the land and figure out how to finance the infrastructure for it. Over the last 2 to 3 years, all of a sudden was a gigantic surge in users moving in. They're running out of land and will be out of serviceable, immediately developable land in the next couple of years, most likely, okay, given the current pace. So our nearest neighbor that's the most aggressive about growth is almost out of land. The other issue is that after Intel announced its expansion in Ohio, the state decided to form a blue ribbon panel to take a look at our industrial land availability statewide with a focus on Washington County. And why we aren't providing industrial land and sites throughout the state, but particularly in the Portland Metro region and Washington County. What are the obstacles to that and how much opportunity are we losing? So all of the effort going into that and a lot of the information that's coming out of all of that discussion is also driving this. As Hillsboro's closest neighbor, we have the opportunity, if we want, to realistically, the next stop up, realistically be a place for some of those types of businesses to locate here. Not on the scale that Hillsboro does and plans to do, but there are industries that don't find opportunity in Hillsboro or elsewhere because the region has been so out of industrial land for so long. So North Plains now has a different level of opportunity than it did even 3 years ago. So that's the big change. The next few tables are kind of the detail. It's kind of hard to see, and it was in the report, and so you're welcome to kind of take a look at it in detail. So the first table, actually the first two tables really get into the detail. This is really kind of, these are the key findings. That summary table you just saw is really just how many acres, gross acres by broad use category. This information in table 6.07 in the EOA, please do take a look at that in detail if you haven't already. But it details how many sites, what size they should be based on opportunity identified, and then what type of uses or targeted industries are we looking at in terms of specifically planning for? I mean, there's a level of specificity that we have to plan for when we do go through this process with the UGB. We can't just say, we want 500 acres and we hope people land here. It's not how it works. We have to be very specific about who we're trying, what the opportunity is, who these firms are, what they look like, likely or will look like, and what they'll likely need based on a lot of very specific criteria and the outreach that we did during the EOA process. So I'll have a summary slide in a moment about the different size sites, but we do have opportunity to bring in a couple of sites of 100 acres or more, really kind of getting at data processing, perhaps some larger electronics manufacturing, or some sort of combination of those. There is also opportunity to bring in a couple of other 100-acre sites, or a few 100-acre sites potentially, that kind of get at other types of users that might or might not be kind of high tech like our neighbor to the east, but are similar or kind of a more supply chain related. We might not get a gigantic employer per se, but a lot of medium to larger sized employers are part of the supply chain to high tech or other industry in Washington County. And North Plains being just a few minutes away from those businesses is an opportunity. You can go ahead, Andy, on the next one. Thank you. Smaller users and smaller businesses, smaller wholesalers, local businesses who want to be in North Plains, there's a ton of opportunity for them to be. We want to plan for, or looking to plan for, 23 different sites with a bunch of space for, up to 80 acres for expanding users, 65 acres in total for space suitable for very small to very small businesses. If you add up all that space, that's actually a bunch of different small businesses, a ton of small businesses that can move into that. So in terms of number of businesses we're looking to plan for, the vast majority of them are actually small to very small businesses and how this land need is breaking out. It's just the big sites that we have the opportunity to plan for, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, or however many, fewer than 10 larger employers. Most of the employers that we're looking to plan for are in this category, small to very small. They just don't happen to combine, take up as much space potentially and need as much land. On the commercial side, and there's a summary table we'll get into, we're looking at least one site that's 40 acres or so for a larger commercial development with some business park in it, but commercial services as well to serve local residents as well as folks going to the coast or taking Highway 26. Maybe they're coming home on exit off of Glencoe Road and head south to Forest Grove and Cornelius. But North Plains is an opportunity for them to stop somewhere and potentially shop as well as for residents, certainly. There's opportunity also for a few sites for business park, a wide variety of different types of employers, size of employers to kind of be in business park space that gives them flexibility for how they office or how they even light manufacture, that sort of thing. And then 17 sites total, 85 acres. This is actually the biggest category of commercial land need that we've identified in our EOA. And that's for small to very small businesses who, some retail certainly, but some lodging even, that will be opportunity. But commercial services, office, retail, smaller firms in this type of space, this is actually the biggest opportunity in terms of total land and number of sites on the commercial side. So the findings don't find that we have need for a lot of big commercial development. There's a lot of need for business park and business park to be occupied by different types of employers, office type users, that sort of thing. But really on the commercial side, smaller sites is the biggest finding of opportunity for smaller types of businesses, medium to smaller. So that's kind of the detailed findings, but that's table 6.07 in the EOA. So please do take a look at that. Here's a summary. We can kind of go through this quickly because we talked about it in detail, but on the commercial site side, again, 0 to 5 acre sites, this is the overwhelming need for North Plains over the next 20 years. Different commercial and business park space, but medium, small, and even very small businesses being able to site in this type of development. And then a few sites getting up to a little bit larger up here, up to 50 acres. This one is for kind of a larger retail business park, larger development type opportunity. On the industrial side, the distribution of site need is much broader. Again, we have opportunity for some larger sites up here for some larger employers. But again, the largest number of sites overall is really intended for 0 to 5 acres. These are really kind of the medium, small, and very small businesses. So it's a bit of a balance that there is opportunity to go for from large to very small to provide a wide array of opportunity for different types of businesses to be here within that acreage that is identified as opportunity. So contextually, just you all know the area and this map very well, so I'm not telling you anything new on that side. But the bottom line is, just for context, everything shaded white is undesignated under current designation in Washington County. And that's the study, all of this is the study area that we're looking at here that Steve talked about earlier. So we are an island surrounded by undesignated land and then rural reserves that can't be developed for years and years and years, basically. So we really are kind of this island of what we can look at for opportunity. The acreage and the types of uses we're talking about, this isn't something that can grow and grow and grow out. We do get questions about that. This is where we have to look, and what I'm talking about in terms of employment land opportunity comes to about half of all this over a 20-year period. The urban reserves and rural reserves area here, all of that designation is meant to last for over 40 years when that was established by legislation in 2014. So for employment land, the amount that we've estimated as opportunity amounts to about half of all this undesignated land over a 20-year portion of that 40+ year period. So it's a fair amount of growth for the city, but at the same time, these lands, the undesignated lands south of the freeway as well as north, under the urban reserves the kind of the system that we have that Washington County adopted with that legislation from the state, all of this land does follow to be urbanized, is allowed, and under Oregon land use planning law. This isn't anything because of the designations that were approved in that legislation. They were undesignated for the reason that they could be urbanized in the future. But that's the limit for North Plains for the next 40, 45 years. So it is okay and suitable under Oregon land use planning to look at all that and however much is necessary for the city to do its long-term plan. So as far as how we looked at opportunity, I mentioned that Hillsborough is rapidly running out of land, of currently available development land for industrial growth. For our model, we said, what might North Plains industrial development look like over a 20-year period, given that opportunities have changed significantly in what we might plan for? And what we did was we just looked at the next freeway stop down. We looked at what's happened north of Highway 26 at Brookwood Parkway in Helvetia here. This is what used to be called, I don't know that it's still called this, but for a long time it was called the Helvetia Industrial Area by the city of Hillsborough. And if you've driven through there or if you work there, and I have some photos in a moment, it's a very broad variety of different types of industries. There aren't any gigantic microchip manufacturers like Intel in here, but we do have a variety of things like Reeser's potato salad facility is up in here. There's a ton of business park space here with a wide variety of different types of businesses. If you've been to ABV, there's actually a restaurant and brew pub there. Steeplejack Brewing is moving into here right now, but there's also a lot of different security services and technology firm in here that's been there for a while. Box manufacturer, tech suppliers to vendors to Intel and some others. But a wide variety of users and businesses that most resemble really the wide variety that was identified in terms of opportunity for what could happen in North Plains. So, if you aren't familiar with the area, just head down the freeway, get off at the Helvetia Brookwood interchange, and go north and just drive through and take a look. I have a couple of pictures here in a moment. So this is what it looks like, what's been built recently and what has been up for a while. These two buildings were recently constructed. This is now done. It is a data center, and it's one of the larger ones that's moved into Hillsborough, and it's on the north side of the freeway. But it's highly landscaped. It's not extremely industrial looking, and there are a lot of requirements for berms and landscaping. So it is big industrial development, but at the same time, there are requirements put on it to look a certain way. This is a medium-sized business that moved in. It's a vendor to Intel, basically. So, they were required to put in a certain type of looking building and parking and everything with landscaping on the site. Here we got a glimpse of that. Business park space, this is light industrial space, and it has a wide variety of wholesalers. There's a construction company, I believe, in there, and some other types of vendors to Intel included. And this is more kind of the business park space that is in that area. And this is more office users, insurance companies. There are some, businesses who need a variety of sizes of more office type space in a nicer looking building. That's what's there also. And so that really informs how we've been looking at what the findings are for the EOA and what it might look like in North Plains.
Thanks, Bill. So a lot of information there. We're going to have time towards the end of the meeting for public comment, but right now I want to open it up to our PAC members, both in the room and online, if you have any questions or comments for Bill. Anyone in the room? I know some of you have seen this information before. Oh, I was going to say, I don't think we included the EOA in the PAC packets. Is there a place, Bill or Andy, that people can access that online on the city's website?
It's on the city's UGB
It is
webpage.
posted there. Great.
Yep.
Any questions or comments from those online? PAC members, I'm not seeing any. Well, great job, Bill. Okay, well, if there aren't any questions or comments, let's move to the next phase, thank you, of the presentation, looking at the preliminary goal 14 boundary location analysis. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So first, a few notes. The purpose of tonight's meeting was intentionally to take a look at the preliminary analysis, get comments from the PAC, get comments from the public before we start to have a discussion about in what direction North Plains might grow. That was really what we wanted to accomplish tonight, was to really focus on the analysis. Our analysis, because the EOA was recently completed, was built upon the land needs identified in the previous EOA and the site needs identified in the previous EOA. I think I can say that confidently, before we go into the specifics, that, well, these sub areas were created based on those land needs. And we know that a lot of pretty much all of the land, with few exceptions, north of Highway 26 is suitable for development. It's relatively flat, and both residential and employment development, it's relatively flat. There are very large parcels, and there are very few environmental constraints. The one differentiator that you'll see in the analysis to some degree was the distance of different areas from the current city limits, because you want to grow in an efficient manner, starting with land adjacent to your current city limits. When we look at the results of the EOA, we now know that there's a need for more land, larger sites. And so while I think it's valuable for us to look at this preliminary analysis, one of the things we'll want to think about is how do the results of the EOA change the next iteration of this analysis? For instance, we might want to combine some of these smaller sub areas into larger sub areas, so we get some of those 100-acre sites, 50-acre sites that we're looking for. So I just wanted to kind of predicate the conversation with that acknowledgement that these results are going to change a bit. And we'll certainly like to hear your thoughts and recommendations around that based on the new results of the EOA. But with that said, Andy, let's go to the next slide. So just a reminder, the 4 boundary location factors established by Goal 14, Oregon statewide Goal 14. Number 1, the efficient accommodation of identified land needs. Number 2, the orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services. 3, the comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences of growth. And 4, compatibility with nearby agricultural and forest activities. Next slide. So in our analysis of that factor number 1, we looked at a number of things, including the proximity, like I mentioned, of the land to the existing city. The suitability of the land in terms of sites to meet specific needs identified in the EOA. Parcel size was something we looked at, and the amount of buildable land, which is the gross land minus developed land and environmental constraints. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick map that shows land within a quarter, half mile, 3/4 of a mile. Again, the land further away we considered a little bit less suitable based on those previous land needs. That's something we'll take another look at in our next iteration of the analysis. Next slide. This is a map showing parcel size, with the darker colors being the larger parcel sizes. You can see that most of the land north of Highway 26 includes very large parcels. Smaller parcels in the area south of Highway 26. Next. When looking at factor number 2, we divided it. This is the provision of public facilities. We divided it into 2 categories. One is transportation. Nick's here with us to answer any questions that come up later on that end. And the second, which I'll show in a moment, is other utilities, water, sewer, and stormwater. So in Nick's analysis, he looked at things like regional and local mobility, safe access, environmental concerns, feasibility, and looking at a balanced transportation system. Next. For utilities, and that was conducted by civil engineers at 3J Consulting. They looked at existing and planned infrastructure to support development. Next. Factor 3 is what's called an ESEE analysis. The economic portion of that, we looked at the cost of land and infrastructure, parcel size, development potential, and looking for a diversified tax base. Social, ease of access to schools, parks, and commercial services, community health indicators, compatibility with nearby uses, cost of construction, and looking to reverse that bedroom community trend. Next. For environmental, looking at hazards and Goal 5 resources present, and then energy, ability to reduce vehicle miles traveled, looking at the feasibility for alternative modes of transportation and the heating and cooling of structures. So are there large trees present? And some of this, clearly overlaps with some of the other analysis of infrastructure and transportation facilities. Next slide. Finally, the compatibility with nearby agricultural and forest activities. Based on other analyses that we reviewed, we looked at high potential conflict with intensive livestock or poultry processing operations, feedlots, dairies, moderate potential conflict with commodity crops, row crops, orchards, vineyards, etc., and low potential conflict with woodlots, pasture, grazing, and passive management uses. We also looked at agricultural industry impacts. Next slide. So we kind of took a look at each of these sub areas, and I'm just going to give a brief summary of what we found there. For the north sub area, this is adjacent to the existing urban growth boundary, which is also the city limits. And there are large unconstrained, meaning lack of environmental constraints, large parcels with lack of environmental constraints. There are mainline extensions for water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater exist, so those are not needed. Those will not need to be constructed. There's the potential for strong, safe, and convenient multimodal access to the existing city. Regional mobility, it's within a mile of Highway 26 via Northwest Glencoe Road. And then that agricultural compatibility, low potential conflict. Next. South sub area A, in case you can't see it, it's kind of tucked away here. It is adjacent to the urban growth boundary, but Highway 26 kind of serves as a barrier. And there are smaller parcel sizes here relative to other sub areas. Mainline extensions for sanitary, storm, and water would be needed to service the sub area. There's some regional mobility potential due to its proximity to the highway and the interchange with Glencoe Road. However, it is kind of isolated here with it would need to have access through these other areas, which consist of a number of private roads. And Highway 26 really limits some of that active transportation mobility, so biking and walking to get to services on the other side of the highway. This area had a moderate potential conflict in terms of that agricultural compatibility. Next slide. South sub area B. This has good access via Highway 26 and Glencoe Road. There are, again, somewhat smaller parcel sizes than on the other side, those other sub areas. Mainline extensions for sanitary and storm would be needed to serve the area. There's strong regional mobility potential due to, again, its proximity to Highway 26. But in terms of bicycle and pedestrian mobility, there are some limitations from Highway 26. And again, moderate potential conflict from agricultural, but really good access here. And while the bike ped connections are not strong in this direction, there's a lot of access for vehicle travel. Next slide. South sub area C, I mentioned earlier. Again, this is adjacent or near Highway 26 and Glencoe Road. Highway 26 serves as that same barrier, but at the same time provides regional mobility. There are some smaller parcel sizes that surround, this is the airstrip, so kind of smaller parcel sizes surrounding the airstrip. Mainline extensions for sanitary and storm would be needed. There is regional, as I said, regional mobility potential, but local mobility throughout this area. The airstrip actually causes some problems in terms of establishing a road network within this area. As I mentioned earlier, development is due to existing ownership patterns, private streets, the airstrip, and then the associated airplane maneuvering facilities, and then again, moderate potential conflict. Next slide, please. West sub area A, again, adjacent to the existing urban growth boundary with large unconstrained parcels. Mainline extensions exist for sanitary and storm in some areas. Water infrastructure updates would be needed. There's strong regional mobility via the Dersham Road interchange, which is north on Highway 26. There's potential for local connectivity via Northwest North Avenue extension and Mountaindale Road. And again, moderate potential conflict from agricultural uses. Next slide. West sub area B, again, some of our analysis was, looking at these smaller sub areas. This is not adjacent to the current city limits or urban growth boundary, but it again does have large unconstrained parcels. Mainline extensions for sanitary water and storm would be needed to service the area. Strong regional mobility via the Dersham Road interchange. Local mobility would be dependent on Northwest Pumpkin Ridge Road and Dorian Road. And again, that moderate potential conflicts from agricultural uses. Next slide. Now we're moving over into the east sub area. Again, east sub area A is adjacent to the existing urban growth boundary with 2 large parcels. This is one area that does have significant environmental constraints here. However, with the large parcels, there's still plenty of area to develop. There's access to efficiently tie into sanitary water and storm infrastructure, local mobility, safe access, and balanced multimodal connectivity to the established infrastructure to the west. There's a little bit of challenge in terms of connectivity due to the McKay Creek corridor. I know there's been some talk for some time of making a connection on Pacific Avenue across the creek. That does pose a challenge in terms of connectivity. And then low potential conflict from agricultural uses. Next slide. Sub area B, this is one large parcel. Again, the environmental constraints creep into this area a bit, but still a lot of land to develop. There are existing and planned sanitary, storm, and water infrastructure along the border of the sub area. Regional mobility is accessible via Highway 26 and Jackson School Road. Local connectivity, there are connections here, but again, those east-west connections would be dependent on potentially another connection across the McKay Creek corridor and moderate agricultural conflicts. Next slide, please. Sub area C, this is adjacent to the urban growth boundary. It's one large parcel, but there are some significant environmental constraints. For those who don't know, this is where the Recology facility is located. Sanitary and water extensions would be needed. Again, there's challenges due to McKay Creek. Transportation network extension from the west is plausible, but again, eastward connectivity might be challenging due to the wetlands. And moderate potential conflict from agricultural uses. So east sub area D is up here. It's adjacent to the urban growth boundary with 2 moderately sized unconstrained parcels. There is access to sanitary, storm, and water infrastructure. Fire flow deficiency to the west has been identified. Again, there's regional mobility via Jackson School Road and Highway 26 interchange, and moderate conflict with adjacent agricultural uses. Next. Finally, east sub area E. Again, kind of like with west sub area B, this sub area is a little bit further. It's not directly adjacent to the urban growth boundary, but it does include mostly large unconstrained parcels. Mainline extensions for sanitary and water would be needed to service the area. Again, regional mobility via Jackson School Road and Highway 26. Local transportation network would be somewhat dependent upon development of these areas, but West Union Road and Jackson School Road are available. And again, moderate potential conflict from agricultural uses. Next slide. So that was a lot. Again, I think a lot of the land is similar in terms of its characteristics, being flat and with large parcels and unconstrained. Maybe, Andy, we could go back up to that first slide with all the sub areas just to have something to look at while we have our discussion. But interested to hear from folks, questions, comments about the preliminary look at these different areas. And as I mentioned, as we revisit the analysis, if there's any recommendations, one of the things we talked about was just having a west, north, east sub areas. We're probably going to keep the south split up a bit because of that airport area that we want to exclude. But that's one option as we look at the analysis again, but open to your questions and comments at this time. Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I had two quick questions about sub area A, and I think these are just clarifying questions. This is East sub area A. The first, I am looking at the score sheet in the transportation part of the packet.
Okay.
And I was curious about the regional mobility score being 0 instead of 1 with its proximity to West Union out to Jackson School. And then 2, my second question is about the safe access. The comments say that it's access is limited on West Union Road, and then, as you mentioned, the presence of McKay Creek. But I was wondering, I thought there was a new pedestrian path along West Union Road up to the intersection of Glencoe and West Union, and then that would be a potential connection that would be hopefully in the same time frame to get to the downtown as that intersection gets improved.
Thanks, Jessica. First, Andy, can you comment on the path that she's referring to?
Probably haven't been here in a while, but it's complete.
It's complete?
Yes, yeah. So yes, it exists.
Okay. And Nick, can you comment on the?
I think the question was specifically kind of questioning why there was a 0 score for the regional mobility for East sub area A. And so the regional mobility score is primarily based on access to the interchange or interchange areas, thinking beyond North Plains. We scored it a 0 primarily because it requires traversing adjacent parcels to it. It's not a direct connection to either interchange area and would just require a little bit of out of direction travel.
And I'll just add, just so everyone knows, the analysis was really relative to, and this is why I mentioned that a lot of these areas are we're kind of parsing, picking nits here. A lot of the land is close to equally suitable, but we were doing a relative comparison for the purposes of this analysis. And East sub area A is not as quite a direct connection to that interchange as some of the other sub areas. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Right. I was just wondering if for consistency of the other scores, like South sub area C has a +1 for regional mobility, but it also, if I'm looking at it right, would have to traverse a collector or an arterial road to get there. But it actually is closer to the Glencoe interchange, so I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit more of a proximity thing. I agree. It does have to traverse another sub area, but the distance traveled through that sub area is shorter.
Other questions and comments? Mayor Linehan?
I do have a question. So I was curious too, and about the, based on the analysis and the scoring of each of the sub areas, is there a requirement at the state level or anything where we actually have to look at those sub areas with a higher score versus, lower score?
No, and in the report, I tried to make it as clear as possible that this analysis is information for this group to help you make your recommendation and to aid and inform your discussion. And likewise, eventually when this goes to city council, certainly if there were drastic differences in the scoring between one and another, that might come into play. But generally speaking, we hope that this information really informs your discussion, what we hope to have at our next PAC meeting when we get down to actually looking at areas that the city might want to grow. Does that answer your question?
And to follow up on the mayor's comment, I'm assuming we don't have to include entire sub areas. We could take partials or add them together. So this is just a way to break it up to kind of score, but we could pick and choose portions of each sub area.
Correct, and thank you for that. We had to create some sort of geographic areas in order to do our analysis. This is where we landed. Like I said, in the next iteration of this, they might change a little bit. But we don't have to bring in whole sub areas by any means. Other questions or comments? We're gonna get to public comment in just a little bit. Thank you. Glenn.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Steve. Just I don't have any conclusions from this, but just point out, and I know the city is aware of it, there are, speaking from out for the public, the Glenn Boland again with Oregon Department of Transportation. There are what we call interchange area management plans in place for some intersections along our freeways. Glencoe Road is one, and Jackson School Road has one. I don't know if Dersham does. And in those areas, there are some pretty prescribed future improvements that both describe what needs to happen, but also the maximum that will happen. So for example, Jackson School Road, there's even some discussion there about the rural nature of what the road does and serves. So we'll want to coordinate with that as we move forward, because that may affect some of the regional access discussions or scores. And also, Steve, you mentioned, when you're looking at the east sub area, you talked about the need for an east-west, connecting west toward the city might be difficult in some, I think. I do believe there is a planned east-west collector, and that, because I think that's part of the Jackson School Road IAMP, as we call them. And I believe that's in the city's plans. I haven't looked at the TSP most recently enough to know. So I just wanted to just mention that local connectivity in the east sub area may not be as tricky as one thinks, except for obviously limited crossings because of the creek and the riparian areas around it.
Thanks, Glenn. And certainly the cost associated with those connections as well. But I think
Right.
the Civic Avenue is where a planned connection is that would also include infrastructure for water, I believe. Yeah.
Sure.
Kevin.
You bet. Thanks, Steve. Clarifying questions. I think, one of the issues here is we're looking at the goal 14 factors, kind of evaluating all the areas within the study area. I think my understanding is that the areas to the south there around the airport are zoned, those are exception lands. Am I getting that correct? Those are rural residential as opposed to EFU and other lands. And so the importance there is that in terms of applying the goal 14 factors, that's when you're looking at an apples to apples. So you're looking at areas within the same category of prioritization. And I guess what I'm getting to is the way the regulations read, the exception lands would need to be considered first before you move on to the EFU lands. The other question is on the soil types and whether all of the non-rural reserve agricultural lands I forget if you had mentioned that, is it all high value farmland, or are there some differences in the different areas we've looked at?
Thanks, Kevin. First, on the goal 14 factors and the exception lands, yes, the city would need to look, not all of the land south of Highway 26 is exception land, but a good chunk of it is. We would have to look at those lands first, but I'll also remind everyone that the city is also looking to exclude a portion of that land around the airport. And we kind of made a pretty strong case for that in phase 1 and plan to include that in the eventual final analysis. But thank you for clarifying that the city does need to look at exception lands first. In terms of soil types, all of the EFU lands, according to the analysis that we did and that we submitted, DLCD staff did review it. Hillary Foote reviewed that for us, and it met with their approval. All the lands are high value agricultural land based on very specific and complicated definitions that we had to adhere to do that analysis. So all of the lands, I guess that south sub area A, which is EFU land, and then all the land to the north would all be treated the same. So first priority is the exception land, and then fourth priority, which is the next priority for our purposes, is that high value agricultural land.
Thanks. And Hillary is our expert. So I appreciate the review of that. Thank you.
Steve, I have a question for you. So at what point do we look at the exception land and take that off the table?
It's a good question. And I don't know if Pat Rubella is here with us. He might have I'm not a lawyer. My understanding is that we have to, the city needs to submit at the end of this process, a recommended UGB expansion that city council will approve, and then it goes to the county and the state for approval. And which is why we've been trying to submit things to DLCD for an informal review as we go along. Because I don't know, and Kevin, maybe you can correct me as well. I don't know that we would receive word from the state as to whether or not they accept our proposal to exclude those lands until they get the formal UGB expansion from the city. Is that your understanding, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, I'm happy to review preliminary materials as we go along, but yeah, in terms of our, official review, we need to see the full analysis.
So in working with Jessica at the county and Kevin at the state, we're trying to avoid surprises, but we have not received any formal or official determination that yes, you can go ahead and exclude those lands, but we're going to continue to make our case to do so.
And then another question, and this might be something that Glenn can reflect on. I know that we have transportation constraint, only so many ways in and out of North Plains. And we do have another exchange, but it's under the 1 mile threshold, I guess, at the ODOT level. So it's at Gordon Road. And I'm just curious, and I know that we brought this up to you before, Glenn, and I know, you probably can't like truly give me the answer I'm looking for, but I'm still wondering, down the line, if ODOT would potentially consider, like an off ramp or an on ramp, just like a smaller version of a on or off ramp at the Gordon Road exchange.
Yeah, you're right. I don't have I can't speak for the whole agency on this, but I can say, is I've inquired and I've been, it's been relayed to me that, yeah, that's really be difficult to try to do something there. I do know from a practical standpoint that there's a big difference between on ramps and off ramps. Because on ramps, we get our weaving motions, and that's where we have safety and congestion issues. So off ramps are generally easier to accomplish than an on ramp, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from our advisory committee members?
So actually, before I should have said this a second ago, real quick. Sorry, Steve. Whenever we are processing a public access, meaning a road, not a driveway, a road, to the state system, it goes through a committee and then ultimately up to the chief engineer for ODOT. And in regular world terms, the test they apply is, does the public access improve the function of the facility? So it can be a pretty high bar to make in a situation like this. It's easier for me. I've got places where I've got properties with 3 driveways and they want to make a public street instead. If I get rid of 3 driveways and put it a signalized public street, that's a big safety advantage, and that could improve the situation on the highway a lot. because driveways are, danger points. But in a case like this, it's a pretty hard bar, I guess I would say.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other questions or comments from our advisory committee members? Okay. Andy, if you could just scroll to the end of the presentation, I just want to talk briefly about next steps, and then we'll open it up for public comment. So as I mentioned, thank you for your comments, and we'll take public comments and then go about the business of revising our analysis. We will schedule the next meeting of this group in a few months to come back and have a discussion of about recommending an urban growth boundary expansion, or at least preparing a preliminary expansion recommendation. We'll then, our team will prepare materials related to that, and we'll come back again for a final discussion and recommendation that would go to city council, and then again to the county and state. Heather, Austin, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Sorry, I was taking notes.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem.
I know you were doing some research on the approval process between the city and the county, and Jessica's with us too, but did you find any preliminary idea of how that approval process would take place?
Yes, I did. And if you'll give me a couple of minutes, I can pull up my notes on that. It's been a little while since I've looked into that.
Okay, we can come back to that, Heather.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. And then if there are no further questions or comments from the committee, we can go ahead and open up to public comment. Andy, do we have a microphone up here?
There is a microphone there, yeah.
So if folks want to come up or to speak, I know there were a few hands earlier.
Is it?
Just hold it down. Yeah, should work. Hello, hello. Oh, I think it turned the picture. You want that voice?
Well, yeah, I think so.
I appreciated all the stuff on the industrial commercial, bringing it in. I guess my question is the logical one. Has the committee said, here's where it should go? Because when I'm looking at the map, there's 2 roads in North Plains. Glencoe doesn't have the stuff next to it. Gordon would be great, but it doesn't sound like we can get a way in off Gordon. So we're Jackson. So Jackson School Road seems like where you would want to put the commercial office, because I presume people don't want to drive off Glencoe all the way down to commercial over to that parcel of land on Gordon, right? With their trucks and all this stuff. So I guess my question is that something all of the committee does is ultimately says, here's our recommended number 1 for commercial industrial. Now, I realize I brought that up because there's limitations. If you pick closest to 26 off Jackson, then you'd also want to have the other parcels next to it to bring all the infrastructure. So just anything you can say on that whole.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So as I mentioned, tonight was really to look at the analysis of the sub areas. We're going to refine this analysis, and at the next meeting of this project advisory committee, this group will we'll probably give a brief presentation of the updated analysis, and most of the meeting will be dedicated to discussion amongst the committee about exactly that, where to allocate land within the study area for the residential, commercial, and industrial needs of the city. Hopefully that answers that question. Did you have anything to add, Bill? No.
Next week.
Bill, online.
Okay, we'll take the comment online. I just want to mention that the microphone is live up here, so if we have other questions or comments from the public, please come on up to the podium. Bill, why don't you go ahead? We can't hear you, Bill.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, I'm lacking my own image, so hopefully I'm centered. I'm the president of Roth Development, which owns the Sunset Airport. We've been trying to avoid getting included within the UGB. In reading the phase 1 documents, it appears that you recommend exclusion of South Area C. I'm wondering if you're also planning exclusion of South Areas A and B. I heard in this presentation you think that A is EFU. I believe it has been rezoned as houses are now being built there. There was some regulation if adjacent properties became residential, you could then flip it. So are you planning on exclusion of C, and does the state have to approve it? What's the process, and what's going on with A and B? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Bill. Our phase 1 report looked at excluding just South Area C. We did take a pretty close look at South Subarea A and saw that it was zoned EFU. We can take another look at that. If there was a change in the zoning designation, it didn't show up in the resources that we looked at. But that area could be considered if there has been a change in zoning there. And then we are not planning to include South Subarea B in our request to have the area excluded. So C is our focus. If there's a change in A, we could take another look at it, but we do not plan to exclude South Subarea B.
Okay, I read through factor 2B and it seemed a very similar analysis applied to all of those areas with regards to utility expansion.
Regards to utility expansion, yes. I think access to transportation facilities is certainly better for South Subarea B than it is for A, for instance. So there's a lot, we need to apply all of the 4 factors simultaneously. We don't apply them in any particular order. And so, the initial analysis was looking at all 4 factors.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick question on the exception area. What does it specifically mean to consider the exception area?
When looking to expand, the city needs to first look to those lands for expansion before it can look at the non-exception lands. So,
okay, I understand, but I guess my question is like, if there are no significant barriers, does that mean that it's guaranteed that that will be part of the plan?
correct. Correct, yeah. If the state doesn't accept our proposal to exclude South Subarea C, and we think for similar reasons not excluded, but South Subarea A is kind of isolated. If that area is excluded, then we would have to look at those areas before any other area to bring it in. So if there's no.
But sub-area B is like.
Sub-area B.
Guaranteed, right?
I mean, I don't want to say guaranteed, but
it's a very.
It's a candidate, yeah. Go ahead.
A lot of those other areas are already developed in larger lots and stuff, and there's really no great expansion there for residential or anything. So actually trying to bring that in is probably not going to happen because there's nothing to add value there.
I think this is the case we're trying to make that there's a pretty large residential and employment need, and that area just is not going to help the city meet any significant portion of that need.
Right.
Glenn.
Yeah, this was responding to Mr. McCandless, if I pronounced that correctly, comments there. You noted in, I think in like Subarea B, for example, that there's good regional transportation access. I can't remember what the local was listed at, but I think that what I wanted to bring up is a lot of cities that have a freeway between them and, going through them, wish they didn't. So, there are transportation issues with having uses and growth across the freeway because you only have those overchanges for access. And so, and obviously you have a lot of turning motions on those overpasses, at least Glencoe getting on and off the freeway. So it could be some outcomes that you don't want to see that aren't showing up yet in the analysis with that location. And I might jump in here too. I thought I heard someone ask for the definition of exception lands, and in just regular person parlance, it's like if it's not farm zoned. So basically residential and commercial rural zone lands, we planners call them exception land because an exception was taken to the standards of goal 3 or goal 4. So very nerdy stuff. So we use terms we forget to define.
Thank you, Glenn. To your first comment, and as Stuart King could attest to, the last urban growth boundary expansion, which was just for residential purposes, I think the city made a strong case to not expand south of the highway. And I think that for residential purposes, I don't think from my feel of our group in the city that has changed. But there is an opportunity to, in that south sub area B for example, commercial uses that would not involve residents, new residents on the south side of the highway traveling.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see the logic. I think we'll want to see what Nick's group shows in the modeling with turning motions and traffic counts and whatnot to see what kind of conflicts are or if it works.
Thanks. Other public comments or questions?
I do have one question.
Please come up to the microphone, please. Thank you.
On the area E, the smaller parcel that runs right along the highway there, why is that shaded 2 different colors?
We're going to go back to that. You are referring to this?
Down further.
I'm sorry?
Down further.
Oh, right here?
Yeah. 2 different.
I think that's just because of what is underneath this color, this aerial photograph, whatever the condition of the land there, whatever's, if it's grass or trees or whatever, just looks a little different than the rest of the property. So there's no difference. Sorry if it looks that way. There's no difference there.
Thank you.
Any other public questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I hope we provided you with some useful information in the next phase of this process. And we really look forward to the Project Advisory Committee getting into the heart of the discussion next time in terms of future growth and development in North Plains. So if there are no further questions or comments, we can close the meeting.
Steve, can I just make one quick comment?
To be determined.
To be determined, but we'll be, thanks, Heather, just one second. We will reach out soon to schedule that meeting. We don't have a date set. Heather, you wanted, sorry, I forgot that I asked you a question.
I almost just let you skip over me because what I wanted to say is, can I please just be on the agenda at the next meeting to give some timelines and some process for how we move forward? I had a quick chat with Jessica and she pointed out that of course the county council or county commission would look at this after the city makes their recommendation and adoption, but I'd like to look into some timelines and things like that, and maybe I can just have that as an agenda item at the next PAC meeting.
Sounds good. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem. Thanks.
Okay.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.
Does everyone have a good night?